what we see over and over again, what makes a great MVP does not make a great product market fit. So it's not about getting to market, it's about getting traction in the market and creating predictable, profitable, scalable revenue, as our good friend Aaron Ross would say. And as a result, we think the market developer is in greater demand than the product developer. And so GrowthX was started as a $50 million seed stage fund to help companies that were graduating from these other great accelerators, and they should all exist. We're focused on helping you market product and make money. Because once you actually make money, then you actually might not need it. And if you do need it from venture capitalists like us, you're going to get it at a much higher valuation, and you're going to give up a lot less of your company in the process.
Can you kind of describe how the stage goes from there into sales, when you want to bring on sales, and what you look for when you want to hire that first salesperson, how that works?
Mark Leslie was a founder of Veritas, which grew to be the 4th largest software company in the world at one point before it was sold, $7 billion market cap. And after Mark sold it, and he was a sales guy, after he sold it, he went into Sand Hill Road, he started investing, and he saw the same thing happen over and over again. Companies were being funded based on forecasts that came from thin air or previous companies in a similar industry doing similar things at a previous time. Ultimately what you would see is they would hire a big sales force. That sales force would not succeed. They would blame the sales force. They'd fire everybody. Then they'd reconstitute with a new sales force, and eventually they'd get it figured out. So things always took twice as long and cost twice as much. And he went, this doesn't make any sense, especially in software. In manufacturing, that doesn't happen, right? You build a microphone, and if you plug it in and it doesn't work, you don't go produce 10,000 of them and try and sell them, do you? No. But in software, we sell incomplete product all day. All you have to do is really apply manufacturing learning curve principles of Ed Deming and Kaizen to software sales. It's not as easy because it's harder to measure. Software is squishy. You can't touch it, and it's not tangible, and you can't use cost accounting to determine how much it costs and to deliver it to market. So you've got to follow it in a different way, and that means you start with one person who represents your product in the marketplace, and their job is to be the conduit between the market and the product team, to constantly rapidly iterate on that product. And this isn't something that's just in a book or in a framework. This is a behavior. It's a culture of learning that you have to create in your organization. That there's a person that's talking to the market on your behalf, and when they come back and the market says you should do this, it's not, don't take that as a personal rejection on the product any more than you should take a no in sales as a personal rejection. It's feedback. Feedback is a gift. You take that feedback, you use that feedback to learn. And if you do it without spending too much money and hiring a big sales force, and you've got one person doing this, and you get to a point to where you've got a couple of consecutive quarters where that salesperson is paying for themselves, at least 2 to 3x, right? Their fully burdened number for the quarter, then and only then do you hire another person.
Is that founder-led, or the companies you've seen, is that someone they bring on board, or what are the skill sets? If you're a CEO, I'm sure there's people here starting up companies. When do you know it's not you and bring someone on to do that instead?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I should answer that sooner. That's what you really asked me. So it's all about the attributes of that individual. It's more about the characteristics of them and what they've been able to do at your stage. It's about stage relevance. So the attributes are, can they embrace ambiguity? Do they thrive with a lack of structure? Do they love to design and build as opposed to grow, right? Do they like the digital ditch digging that happens when you're watching a building go up around you? All you see is how quickly it goes up. You don't see the 2.5 years it took in planning to pour this, to get permitting, design the building, pour the footings, and do all that crap underground. That's what a Renaissance rep does. They lay the groundwork. And then they get bored once it becomes repeatable and scalable.
Right. And then what do you transition to from there in a sales organization? How does that go? Does that person stay on, and then have you seen it, they stay on and run the sales organization?
Can a Renaissance rep run a sales organization? Yes. They tend to be more athletic than what we call the coin operated rep, and that's no disrespect to the coin op rep. Do they want to? Typically not. So what they do is go on to customer development in another area of your business, or help develop a new product,
or a new market geographically,
send them into a new vertical, a new market segment. Absolutely, that's how you keep those. They're very entrepreneurial. They love technology, but they're not technologists, right? Like I always say, I can't even spell HTML, but I love technology and what it does to help people. And so I'm a geek for that, and that's why that's my profile. I'm just a Renaissance guy in that way, and then I can communicate that stuff very effectively with engineers. I can talk to humans and engineers. That's a joke, but it's an important.
I forgot the please laugh lines.
It's an important distinction. It's an important skill to have. How do you gain the respect of engineers, provide feedback to them in a way that helps them translate into a product that's better for your customer? How do you advocate for the market and your team at the same time? It's not easy to do when there's so many egos involved.
And so what kind of, if you're looking to hire someone like that, what kind of characteristics or background do you look for to identify someone like that? Because they sound kind of unique.
Yeah, so you have to go out to market with this job posting, and you can go look it up on GrowthX's site. It's there's a Renaissance rep kind of role, and it talks very clearly about these attributes. And so you need to be open about that, and you have to get that buy-in from your investors and the rest of your team that, look, we have a sales learning curve we have to go through. We don't know what we don't know yet about tomorrow. We don't know what we don't know yet about the market. We need somebody who's a functioning learner who can lead this process in the marketplace for us. And they need to be a partner. Now, it could be your non-tech co-founder, which is oftentimes it is. It could be you as a selling founder. That's fine. Or you have to go seek this person out. And I'm doing my damnedest to make sure that this is a thing and people know that this is a thing and that Renaissance rep eventually will be a title that you're seeking.
Right. So that's kind of based on a history view of what someone has done. But if you met someone at a bar, is there anything how do you figure out if they'd be right for you?
I think the attributes come down to being an entrepreneur. Are they people that have the entrepreneurial spirit, but they can't code, right? Or that's just not their thing. They carry a lot of the same attributes and characteristics of product founders. They embrace feedback. They love to learn. They have this passion for technology. The fact that there's no structure, no customers, no revenue, and no help doesn't bother them. It excites them. They have a passion for that. I think that's the best way to demonstrate it.
How would you as a founder or a member of the board want to be measuring them in terms of trying to figure out if they're succeeding or not? How do you know when to toss them and when to bring more and more like them? I know you mentioned a revenue target, but is there anything more?
It's not a revenue target per se. It's not. There shouldn't be quotas on Renaissance reps. You shouldn't even be creating these sorts of things at this stage. The seed stage or the early go-to-market stage should be for learning. And you need to look at the kinds of revenue that you're creating, and recognize what that revenue means. So the easiest way to measure that Renaissance rep is there's a market milestone for everybody, and that market milestone has to be decided. It could be beta customers, non-paying. It could be let me get my first non-affiliated customer, somebody that's not a friend that's just trying to help me out. I've developed and hypothesized an ICP in this segment. Can I acquire a customer in that segment in a way where it costs me less than I earn from that customer? X number of beta customers, a revenue target for a quarter, or number of customers. That's the goal. It's, again, turn your organization into a functional learning organization, and then try and get to a predictable, scalable CAC LTV ratio. Those are the two goals. Right.
Which perfect segue. You've achieved those goals, your market goals, whatever they may be. Now you want to get into the Aaron Ross world of predictable revenue. how do you take that step, or what are the next steps to go, okay, I need to define this process and bring on more people? How do you kind of walk companies through that? Because to me, that seems like a big jump.
Yeah, well, that's because there's a step in between. So the step in between is that you go from initiation phase to transition phase, as we call it, before you go to growth phase or expansion phase. The growth expansion phase is the predictable revenue Aaron Ross phase. Okay. There are wonderful tactics that you can use to get the meeting and create an attraction framework and put instrumentation in place where you have market and sales automation to measure everything you're doing while you're trying to get out of initiation phase into transition phase, and all of that's wonderful. But really what you're trying to do is get to a point to where there's more inbound than there is outbound. And the first time you see that indication is when you have to start thinking about, how do I help now? How do I now find somebody else I can bring onto the organization, whether it's in a sales ops capacity or it's in this transitionary period where you've got somebody who's done the transition before, who can put structure and foundation and organization around all the learning that you've created up until this point.
Right, and that's where you put the process in, and that may be a different VP, for example. You bring a VP in at that stage to start putting in that process.
I would argue maybe not even a VP yet, right? Labor is the highest cost in any organization. It's also the biggest mistake anybody can make is to hire the wrong person too soon, because it's very expensive and it also kills the momentum of your company. You don't need a VP, a traditional VP per se. I mean, you can give them whatever title you want, but you don't need a traditional VP until you're, pushing that 7-figure ARR number.
What are some of the steps you would need to take to kind of see if the market is right, what you need to measure, what you're testing, kind of like a day in the life? Like, what do I do if I'm one of those folks?
Yeah, we actually have a very rote process, ironically enough, that we have our startups follow in our portfolio, and it starts with that first market milestone. What do you need to accomplish next as a business, as an organization? And what's the purpose of that? Because when we look at investing in a company and putting them in our accelerator, we say, can we 10x your valuation by working with you? And it's different than the YCs and the 500s. We're not batch. We don't take 30, 40, 50 companies and say, do these things. We actually work alongside you, teach you how to fish instead of give you the fish, and then eventually help you replace us with people that can fill these roles that we're talking about. So figure out what that first market milestone is, whether it's number of customers, number of revenue, amount of revenue, or number of betas, et cetera. Then reverse engineer the funnel from the bottom up to get there, because everything ultimately becomes a funnel, and it's a numbers game. And then we do market discovery, which is, all right, very similar to Aaron. Who's your customer? Where are they? How do you find them? How do you talk to them? Then once you do, how do you properly qualify the conversation so that you get to know as quickly as you can? Because you're not looking for Mr. Right long term. You're looking for Mr. Right now to get to the next milestone. And never forget that you are a startup. There's only one of you, two of you, three of you, and there's a big wide world out there. And that thing that you sold to investors about the size of the market, you can't talk to all those people right now. Just talk to the ones that want to talk to you that are genuinely interested. And get to know, because the second best answer in traction and market development is no. If you're not a fit, you're not a fit. So go through the conversational framework to determine whether or not there's fit. Use that market feedback to start documenting and revising and iterating what works and what doesn't. And then start using that to iterate on the product internally.
It can be more common to have a handful of sales at the beginning. You get those founder sales, those half a dozen sales at the beginning. But what have you seen most commonly where companies get stuck? Like I've seen a lot of, oh yeah, I've got 10 customers, but they're at 10 customers forever.
Yeah, I think the assumption, to recognize the difference between an assumption and a hypothesis is fundamental to any early stage company. Because you were able to sell somebody once with a certain kind of profile doesn't mean that you can sell other people like that, right?
Right.
So I think you and I were having a conversation up there earlier about this, that there was a certain kind of company that bought from you, and then when you went and talked to all their other people in their space, they wouldn't. And it had nothing to do with the fact that you couldn't help them. It had to do with their mindset. And this goes back to Jeffrey Moore and crossing the chasm in the technology adoption life cycle. And if you're not familiar with this, you need to become familiar with it, because it tells you everything you need to know about the psychology of the markets you're entering. It has nothing to do with technology per se. It actually comes from a farm study in the 50s. It has to do with how people react and respond to change and how they view risk. And innovators are wonderful early customers, and you have to identify who those people are. But they don't have budget, but they're awesome for product feedback. Then there's early adopters. They do have budget. They see you as something that provides a competitive advantage. But then there's the mainstream. The mainstream doesn't view early adopters or innovators as referenceable. They think they're crazy. They won't tell you that, but they'll hint at it with things like, well, who else is using your product?
Right. So clearly what you need to do is get the market leader to be your early adopter.
Oh, yeah. No.
Right?
No, that's the thing.
There you go. Class dismissed.
And unicorns poop rainbows and stars.
Exactly. So one of the things I've seen as well, and I'd be interested to get your thoughts on, is about how you know when you're spinning your wheels. So in terms of like allocating your time and your resources on the right things, how do you know what to do? Where should you start? What have you seen work?
This comes down to how you behave as an organization. You have to get very clear about what your Mr. Right Now customer is again, and how you can allocate your time and resources associated with that. Adam Grant wrote this awesome book, Give and Take. If you haven't read it, you should read it. It characterizes humans in one of three ways: givers, takers, and matchers. And they analyze the data about the most successful people in business and the least successful. And the irony is that on both ends of that spectrum, the top 10% and the bottom 10% are both givers. The difference is that the givers in the top 10% recognize takers for what they are and cut them off. So you have to start to practice essentialism. You have to learn how to say no to people that aren't a fit. And it's not a bad thing. It's not now. So you have to be very hyper-focused on who your customers are, create and establish criteria to properly qualify those people, and determine whether or not you want to spend time on them right now. Because people will seduce you all day. The looky-loos, well, I'll take you this way, or I'll take you that way. Or my worst is people who want to be your channel partner, or people who want to resell your product. Don't ever do channel partnerships when you're in the early stage and you're still in learning. It's a giant waste of your time. You have to create your own demand. Then you can go back to these people. My business partner, Will Bunker, was the founder of what became the Match.com, world's largest dating site. And every day, when they walked into the office on the whiteboard, he put on a whiteboard, most money, least work. What can we do today as an organization to generate the most revenue with the least amount of effort? Not because they're lazy, but because they wanted to be efficient. And when you're a startup, you don't have a whole lot of time and money and resources. You might think you do, but that shit burns up in a hurry.
How do you know when you've gone out, you've done some research, you think of identified market fit, but how do you know you've actually hit a wall, you've stopped? Like, are you looking for some sort of growth, or like, how do you know when you're done? If I'm looking to explore a new market, we've talked about this at how do I know when to stop? Like, quit wasting your time.
Well, I think you got to start with you have to have a process, right? So start with a customer development process and take a kind of a Steve Blank approach to customer development, and use that to learn. You need to ask questions of a market, and it has nothing to do with selling. It has to do with seeking fit and whether or not you have a product that fits them. You hypothesize value in a marketplace, Aaron. You'd love to have a conversation with people to know if, in fact, that value is a fit for them. That's the conversation. And if you're hitting a wall, then you know you're hitting a wall. I mean, you're demonstrating it yourself. And make sure you distinguish between affiliated and non-affiliated customers, too. Because one of the things we tend to do is we go hire somebody to be our Renaissance rep, even though they're not a Renaissance rep, and they bring a book of business with them. And that book of business means early wins, but it doesn't mean scalable wins. And you have to recognize the difference between predictable, scalable revenue and the stuff that you just, got through relationships or other sorts of means.
So if I wanted to get going and wanted to become one of these amazing Renaissance reps, where would I start? Do you have any recommendations besides Growth X? Books to read, YouTube videos, Minecraft?
Yeah, no. Yeah, I can watch Minecraft in my son's room. Yeah. No, I think you have to start adopting the mindset of early stage entrepreneurial founders. So things like what Mark Leslie espouses with the sales learning curve is big. Obviously, we're launching Growth X Academy to try and develop a talent that can help on the market side with product-focused founders in the startup communities in areas and fields of sales, business development, growth hacking, growth marketing, UX, and product design. But I would immediately get myself involved in the startup community. Just because you're not technical doesn't mean you can't add value to a startup. As I said, we used to deify the product developer. We're going to be deifying the market developer for the next generation. I promise you that. Sales is the greatest profession in the world. We're raised to think that it's not. From snake oil to the death of a salesman and Willy Loman and used cars and mattresses and all this other crap. When the reality is that nothing happens until somebody sells something.
And you mentioned something earlier there that I just wanted to highlight. You talked about even if you're non-technical. So do you feel that this this Renaissance rep must be technical? And if they're not technical, how do you suggest they get into so they can really feed that information back to that product team?
Yeah, they don't have to be technical. They have to love tech, right? If you have a passion for tech and you pay attention to it, you can communicate. As long as you're an effective communicator. As my dad always used to say, Sean, you're a great communicator. People will always think you're smarter than you really are. That is the truth. If you can collect the feedback and you can be an overpaid translator between the market and the product team, you can be successful in this. But you genuinely have to love it because startups are a shit show. It's high stress. It's never going the way you want it to. No plan has ever survived the battlefield. You have to learn how to roll with those punches and go with it. And I think ultimately people who can perform well under stress and embrace those moments are the most successful.
Awesome. That's it.